Well, as the SANDF is poised to roll out into the Cape Flats, sharp focus falls on eradicating gangsterism, and experts say that the real question is not so much about gangs, but what we can do to help youth live meaningful, resilient lives in conditions that favour the sprouting of gangs, crime and violence. Jeremy Bayer is a counselling psychologist and he joins us now on the line from Johannesburg. Good afternoon, Jeremy, and thank you for your time on the SABC News Desk.
Thank you for having me.
Jeremy, there are a number of external factors that can contribute to gang activity, socioeconomic circumstances, employment, etc. But what intrinsically motivates a person to join a gang?
A combination of factors. So firstly, from what I've seen in terms of as a psychologist is a lot of these kids or teenagers come from abusive and violent homes. There's a lack of guidance and support. Lack of money. They come from poverty. So the lure of going into a gang means psychologically there's what they may think to be acceptance, money, feeling part of something, and they told that they will have hope for the future. But because there isn't guidance at home, because they're not loved at home, they think this is where I'll seek my acceptance, and that's how they think they'll get a better life. So when they're young, the drug lord or the head of the gang says, if you go do this, if you go be a drug runner, we'll pay you. But it's not real love. And that's how they get lured in. And that's where it starts. And then they get influenced by other people, by their friends, by cousins, by people in the neighborhood. Now they feel like they're really part of something. And then once they get hooked on drugs, then there's no way out. And then, of course, for many of them, the threat of being arrested is not a big factor because the thought is, well, there's no hope for the future. I don't have a job. I'm unemployed. So if I get arrested, it doesn't matter. I'm living under a roof, and I'll get food. So the threat of being arrested is not a big deal. So you can't combine all those factors, and you have the risk of gangsterism and an increase in violence.
Jeremy, just on the note of a lack of guidance, tell us how a lack of positive role models, and then also on another point, exposure to media like television, movies, music, etc., that glorifies gang violence, and how this exacerbates the problem.
Well, personally, I believe the role models and the guidance is the primary factor. I think media is an influence. I think it's a factor, but I think the role models and the homes you come from is a primary factor. So most cases from what I've seen, it's abusive homes and then neglectful homes as well. So when you're growing up, you're taught right from wrong. But when that doesn't happen at home, or when there's negative reinforcement of bad behavior, so you do something bad, and instead of getting punished for it, you're actually praised for it, or there's no comment. So you think the behavior is okay. So you aren't taught right from wrong. And so when that happens, it then allows the behavior to continue. So there's no boundaries, there's no right from wrong. You're continually seeing violence as well. So you think, in order to cope in the society, I've got to be violent as well, because it's a survival of the fittest culture. You have all that, thinking, you don't know right from wrong, and then you have the influence of media as well, seeing violence as well, which I believe just exacerbates it. And then what you have is the breeding ground for someone who's a gangster. But the number one thing for me is definitely a lack of guidance, a lack of boundaries at home, and a lack of hope for the future, and thinking that going into a gang and earning money that way is my only way out. But the media just exacerbates it.
If there's a parent or caregiver out there who now suspects their child or loved one is involved in some sort of gang activity, what is the most constructive way of managing it at that point?
At that point, look, it's not easy. But if they're already in the gang, then it just has to be a concerted effort from the parents to speak to them, to get to them, to talk to them about the dangers of the consequences of being in this gang, to talk to friends of the person who may not be in the gang, the friends of the person who's in the gang, to try and persuade them to get out of it. But it just has to be a persistent effort from parents and family to get the person out. It's not easy, but it has to be done. There also has to be a concerted effort from government to have more rehab clinics in poorer communities. Most of them are in sort of more affluent neighborhoods, and there's not that many rehab clinics in poorer communities, and there are not that many child mental health services. So a lot of teenagers, they have few services for teenagers who have drug problems as well. So you combine those two things and a lack of effort from parents in the first place, then they're at risk. So concerted effort from parents, more child mental health services, more awareness of mental health, and more education on schools on substance abuse as well.
Jeremy, very quickly, we are running out of time. What do you think will be the impact on the public consciousness or the psyche of residents who are watching the army, who will watch the army rolling into their communities? Because generally we see this thing kind of happening in cases of low-intensity war and when police have lost control of what's happening in these areas. Adequate preparation and readying of the community will be crucial, no doubt?
Yeah, it will be, no doubt. Look, it can go both two ways, I should say. On the one hand, it depends for me on what the army's actually doing there. Now that they're there, what are they actually going to do? Are they going to go and investigate? Are they going to be walking around a lot? What actually are they going to be doing? Secondly, once this, because I've heard it's for 3 months, once they're done, then what? So it will be a temporary reprieve for people there, but it could also be, on the other hand, paranoia, because when you see that in your neighborhood, it can result in paranoia. You're basically living in a war zone. So at best, it's a temporary effort, but it's not a bigger picture recommendation or intervention. There has to be regular policing generally. There has to be a war on drugs to get these drugs and more rehab clinics. So it's a start at least, and it is a help because it actually is a state of emergency in those places. But at best, it's a plaster over a crack. So there'll be temporary relief, but until when? That's my concern.
Jeremy Bayer, counselling psychologist, joining us on the line there from Johannesburg. Thank you for sharing your invaluable insights with us right here on the SABC News.